and they want to be able to do the most professional job with the best possible sound and everything, but they also want a nice space. They want to be sitting somewhere. They don't want to be sitting in, sorry, Jules, they don't want to be sitting in a dark black hole. They want to have something.
You're
something
obsessed
nice.
with my black hole.
Yes, sorry. And there's the intro.
We won't go there.
Yeah.
Please don't go there.
This week's podcast is proudly sponsored by Hisense, official partners of UEFA Euro 2024. Big games call for big offers, and that's why Hisense is giving you up to £400 cash back on selected TVs, including the new 4K mini LED TV. Make the smarter choice this summer and find out more at hisense.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to the AV Forum's Home AV podcast for Monday the 17th of June. And on this edition, I'm joined by Jules. Hi, Jules.
Hi, Phil.
And we've also got Neil Davidson. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Phil.
So what are we talking about this episode? Are we talking about 100 million subwoofers in each corner of your room? No, we're not. We're moving things on this week. So we're talking about speaker layout in a home theatre, including your Atmos speakers or other immersive audio formats. Where do you put these speakers? Do you need these speakers? Are there too many channels these days where you've got processors with tens and tens and tens of channels of processing? Is it needed, or have we gone too far? We're going to ask those questions. Whether we get sensible answers, I don't know, but we are going to ask those questions this afternoon. If you want to watch us on YouTube rather than listening, the YouTube channel is AV Forum's podcast channel. Go subscribe to that. You'll get the podcasts. Who are we? We're AV Forums. We've been around since 2000. The editorial's been around since 2003. We're one of the largest hi-fi and AV communities on the internet. And we're here to answer your questions, give you our opinions. We've been around a long time. I'm Phil Hinton. I'm the editor. I've been here 20 odd years now, which is a long time. I'm ISF, THX, and PVA trained and qualified. I am a display calibrator and reviewer, and I also delve into audio products as well. You'll see me on a lot of the YouTube channel, a lot of the podcasts, and so on. We also have Jules. Jules, briefly explain who you are.
Yeah, sure, Phil. I became a THX video calibrator in 2011 and then became an instructor. And now PVA also certified like yourself and instruct with the PVA. I'm also HAA certified for audio stuff as well.
Excellent. And we also got Neil Davidson. Neil, explain who you are and what you do.
Well, like everyone else, I've been doing this a long time now, Phil. So we sell stuff, we design really cool cinemas for people. I also do the odd bit of calibration when I get asked as well, but not as good as you guys these days. You've taken over.
Excellent. So Neil's got loads of experience from the professional side, custom installation, all that kind of thing. Jules goes out in the field and he calibrates a lot of these monitors in the field. He deals with a lot of post-production and so on. And of course, I review consumer products as they come in, and I also have a lot of contacts here. So we've been around 20 odd years, a lot of us here, bags experience. So hopefully we can give you some sensible and good answers and advice for the questions this afternoon, which are speaker layout in your home theatre or your home cinema. We've come a long way in the last 20 years when it comes to that subject alone. A lot of new technologies are around now, a lot of immersive audio, lots of different types of immersive audio because of how powerful DSP has become over the years. It used to be difficult to do 5.1 channels. Now we're talking about multitudes of channels. So Neil, just to give the listener an idea, if they're new to the subject or they maybe haven't delved into this area of the market that much, they've got a 5.1 or a 7.1 system, they're quite happy with it, or they've got a soundbar. Explain how far people can push it up in the higher ends of the market and how many channels we can put into a system.
Well, so it's always an interesting place to start with how many that you can go. So if you look at the commercial Atmos standards, which uses a processor called a CP950, that actually has 64 discrete output channels on it. And the commercial Atmos formats will render out to that number of channels. I can tell you it does work because I was lucky enough to hear one last week in a home that has more than 50 channels.
Wow.
Probably could have done with the trailer spinning round me a little bit less times, but we had to just make sure it was all perfect. So that's a fairly extreme example, I have to tell you. But yeah, you do see these incredible high channel counts these days. And a lot of it's down to spatial resolution and a lot of studies that have gone on that prove that we can, hear these small details. I'm sure it's something that we're going to discuss as we go further, but yeah, it is incredible to think that it's not so long since we were at 5.1 and we were all impressed with that, boys, I think. And there was 50 odd channels.
But it's interesting, Neil, because certainly Dolby tried to move the conversation on from channels to objects when it came to Atmos. And I've been in a few Atmos mix theaters, one recently at Sony Pictures, which was absolutely brand new, state of the art. And they had the display with the room in cube 3D form, and you could move the little round object around, and you could move whatever the sound was around the room and place it where you wanted to. And they were moving away from channels, but again, we seem to be talking about channels again. So maybe that causes a little bit of confusion. Maybe you can explain why that might be the case.
Well, it does get confusing. So when you talk about the professional formats like that, it's all about the rendering engine. So the rendering engine is how it maps from the content out to the physical channel layouts that we've got. Now, at a certain moment in time, I think there was a fairly sensible choice was made by not just Dolby, but DTS and also Auro as well, that probably in the home, it's more practical to talk about channels to people as it is to talk about objects and beds and layers and all of those types of things. So I think that's probably where you see the split happening. There's still an awful lot of very, very clever stuff goes on in the decoders that are taking the raw bit streams and working out where they're going to get played back through these channels. It's just a bit easier to talk about channels. If I would just say, when you're doing an Atmos theatre, you actually program into the setup software where each and every one of these channels is in X, Y, and Z coordinates. So it's pretty precise at knowing where everything is in a three-dimensional space. You can imagine that for the average consumer, that's probably a little bit too much to expect them to be able to do. And that's where your channel layouts really help to simplify it, but keep the performance level.
So it's ease of linguistics, isn't it, Neil?
I think so. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, that's how far we can take it. That's how far you could take it if you were really into the hobby and you had the space and so on. And again, we're talking about spaces, and this is why we have various approaches, because the room, we're back to that room again, but the room is the most important factor. And if you're talking about, somebody who's maybe a little bit more wealthy than the average person and has that kind of auditorium space that they can fill, they're going to be looking for a completely different solution, Neil, to someone who has a living room that's 15 by 10. Those are two completely separate spaces, and they need different solutions to get basically what's the same effect.
Well, it is interesting. It's also interesting, though, to know that there's probably not universal agreement about these number of channels, even in the commercial systems. So we keep banging on about commercial, but hopefully it's enjoyable for people listening as well to know about these things. If you look at an Atmos theatre, we've spoken about up to 64 channels. If you actually look at an IMAX, and I think a lot of people would view IMAX as a gold standard, an IMAX is actually a 12-channel system. These days, when you see that, if you go into the IMAX, you will see the massive IMAX surround speakers. It's normally a dead giveaway when you see them. I guess the argument there was less channels, more performance, and possibly resolution on a per channel basis. So it's interesting that you still even have these discussions when apparently money and everything would be no object in a commercial basis. It's certainly not easy for the consumer. Now, maybe before we go on, guys, I should do my bit for the industry. If anyone is interested, there is a fabulous document called RP22, which was written by Cedia, and a lot of guys contributed a lot of time and effort to create that document. And what that document is like a design standard for immersive audio. And it actually has a lot of very interesting background reading on this subject. There was a lot of work was done to create that document, and it's a free download. People can download that from the CDL website. So I'll give a shout out to the guys there. That was a very impressive bit of work.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Steve couldn't join us today. He's stuck out on a job and couldn't make it in time to come on the podcast. But Steve Carter from Cedar will be on the next podcast. But yeah, thanks for raising that, Neil, because that is an important document for people to do a bit of reading if they really are interested in this subject. But again, let's look at it from the other flip of the coin, the consumer who's maybe new to this, and that's one extreme that we can end up on with. We've got the budget and the space and so on. But Jules, you get into people's houses to calibrate their systems and so on. And what is the typical system that you're seeing these days when you go out to clients' homes and so on? Is it still, lots of speakers everywhere, or are people changing the way that they consume?
Yeah, I mean, on average, I'm thinking, I mean, you know what, there is some great soundbar. I hate to say it, I feel kind of dirty saying it because I've always been a fan of separates.
I agree with you, Jules. I agree, don't worry.
I've always been a huge fan of separates, but there's a certain soundbar from Samsung that has always impressed me. And I thought, when I've set it up, it's like that's a really immersive experience. So and that will cost you maybe £1,000 to £1,500, and you get a great experience from that. But generally speaking, separates probably like average is like 5.1.2 or a 5.1.4, and in slightly bigger rooms 7.1.4 or something like that. Never really any higher than that. But that's your average that I'm finding out and about with AV Forums users.
Yeah. So there's quite a difference there. And then the other flip of the coin is that a lot of people are downsizing these days. They're taking more, they're looking at the room a bit more. COVID kind of trapped people in their homes, and people rethought their living spaces and so on. And a lot of people have kind of downsized. And this is where the soundbar market and maybe the two-channel hi-fi manufacturers have rubbed their hands a little bit and thought, well, if we had HDMI eARC to our equipment, and people can go that route as well. So there's quite a gamut for people to look at when it comes to speaker layout and how many speakers they're going to have in the systems and how many channels and so on. And I guess it's a bit of a challenge, guys, for those people. So if they're listening in and they want to go with a system that's going to suit them, what's the main thing that they need to be thinking about when it comes to speaker layout, and is it worth going to the extreme of immersive audio, and what are the solutions to get into immersive audio? So I'm going to come to you, Jules, first. What kind of advice would you give a client that comes to you and says, Jules, I want you to calibrate the TV, but also I need to rethink my audio system. So what are the things that you're looking for, and what kind of advice are you going to give them?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of Atmos, of immersive audio. I think it makes a big difference when it's positioned correctly. I do come across people who don't position it correctly, but when it's done well, it's, for me, really, you're just sitting in this bubble of sound. It involves you in the content that you're watching so much more. So I'd be a big fan of that. It depends on the size of the room. You've got to take the room itself, as we've said already, is very determinative. What is the size of your room, and what can you logically and best accommodate? I've seen situations where people have got a seven bed layer, and they've got their side surrounds and their rear surrounds literally inches from each other because they haven't got any more room to actually put them where they should be spaced. And so you might as well be better off with a 5, not on a 7. So it isn't necessarily the case that more is always better. It depends upon the room. I'm sure Neil would expand on that.
I'm glad you hit that. That's a great point to hit, because that's where I wanted us to get to eventually, because it's why I mentioned the room. It's going to be different for every person, Neil. And sometimes, as Joe says, sometimes less is more. I've heard some audio mixes where I thought that is outstanding, and then you realize that it was only mixed in 5.1. There was no overheads, there was no other effects in there. Dunkirk is a perfect example of an absolutely astounding 5.1 mix. So you don't have to have speakers on every wall or on the ceiling, do you?
No, I mean, let me just pick up on a couple of the points that Jules made there as well. I think that these days, there's so much choice available in the format of the speakers that people are looking for. Just because, for example, you want a small speaker doesn't actually necessarily mean that you need to compromise a lot on quality. Perhaps the price might be higher because, you know, you're trying to cheat physics or something like that. I always think that your best place to start is try and decide the visual impact that you can accept, and then from there maximize each channel. There's no point to have lots of bad channels. The best small channel count system is always going to sound better overall. In fact, for the very reason that you said there, Phil, so much content is still not in Atmos. I mean, we get spoiled, of course, with everything streaming with Atmos and, you know, Dolby Vision and a million other things like that. But if you actually go back to the source of these things, yeah, I mean, a lot of the content in DCI is still 5.1. That's what comes in the package delivery. It's not Atmos, it's a 5.1 system. Done well, those systems are still incredibly immersive. I can still, for me personally, I can still remember when we started to do demos with Master and Commander, guys. You remember that film?
Yeah.
And the cannons are going off and it sounds as though they're running across your head. I mean, it always amazed me the level of height that they had got into that mix. It's not an Atmos mix or anything like that, but a good system presented that in a way that was incredible. So don't compromise on the quality of it just to fit more channels in.
Yes.
Now, the other one, look, we've all seen it. You know, you go in and you see a set of speakers here that's like headphones. Don't do that. That's a terrible mistake to make. You know, that's when you're 5.1 and the side walls with good spacing. Yeah, it's going to be much more immersive. Much more immersive. I think we're all guilty, aren't we? If you can afford to do it and you want to do it, you want to put more channels in, don't you? It must be better if I've got 7 compared to 5. Don't fall into the trap. Up the quality of the 5.
I'm guilty of it. You know, over 20, about 30 odd years, because I've only been doing this professionally 20 years. I've been an enthusiast a long time, and I've made those mistakes. You know, put more speakers in than I needed. You know, I haven't placed them correctly, or I put too much emphasis originally on the surround channels. I think a lot of people make that mistake. You know, why am I not hearing this? Why is something not jumping out at me? And with Atmos, it's like, I'm not hearing anything above. Well, maybe you're not supposed to hear anything above in that mix. You know, it's down to the creative at the end of the day, how they do that and how. But when you first get these things and you first get into this hobby, it's like, why is the bass not, you know, hitting me in the chest? Why is, you know, not getting anything from the surrounds? So again, I think, you know, you have to think about the content that you're watching, the room that you're in, and trying to get the best out of the space that you have, because you're not in a commercial theatre. Very few of us have the budgets to have that kind of space and a system that would fit in that space. We have average living rooms. And then when you're talking about living rooms, we'll move on to dedicated rooms, but living rooms, the vast majority of people are in living rooms. And we discussed it last week on the TV podcast when we're talking about, you know, 115-inch screens and all that kind of thing, Jules. But the size of room that you're sitting in dictates how big the room is and your viewing distances and so on. And Marek made a good point in the TV podcast about, you know, seating position. You know, if you're too far back from a 4K TV, you're only getting HD resolution at 65 inches and so on. So you have to take this into account. And the same is true for sound. You know, people will say, oh, you must have a 7.2.4. No, you don't. It's whatever fits in. So there are various solutions to these rooms. So Neil, let's move into a small room. And again, people might think, well, how can this possibly work? But a lot of manufacturers are getting around the partner acceptance factor by having the height channels bounce off the ceiling, which, if you think of the average living room, should work, because you're talking about 7-8 foot flat ceilings. Most living rooms are like that, unless you live somewhere a bit more special that has vaulted ceilings or whatever. But the typical British living room is like that. So is that a good solution? And should people consider that if aesthetics are a main concern?
Well, I think it is actually a very interesting solution. Britain's Best on TV, the Sky Glass, I believe, guys, has Atmos speakers built into the top of it. as well. So it also uses that approach to the whole thing. Now, it's never going to be as effective as having overhead speakers, right? And there's lots of physics reasons to do with that, with dispersion and all those types of things. Is it going to give you an experience that's probably better than not having it? Yeah, you know what? Probably it is. Probably it is. And Phil, you said at the start of this, DSP has come on a lot over the years. Computing is cheap these days compared to what it used to be. And yeah, the whole study of psychoacoustics and DSP and all that type of stuff. People might be surprised to know that if you look at audio engineering, there's so much money being spent on pushing ridiculous performance out of small drivers through the use of DSP, because yeah, that's where the market went quite a long time ago with all these small things. That's why you can get fairly incredible performance out of a soundbar, because the engineering actually that's gone into them is intense compared to a normal speaker. Hate to say it, but that's kind of what's happened. So those up-firing ones, and you tend to find the ones that have got an up-firing also have an element of wide channel as well to them. Wide channel can be a little bit more difficult, of course. Like my own TV isn't centered on the wall, it's off to the side, because that's just how it works in the room. That's a little bit more difficult, can lead to a little bit of an imbalance in the sound. If you've got a decent soundbar that lets you do a little bit of a calibration or mapping, though, that can actually help quite a lot. Now, one of the other things that we're seeing, and I'm not so experienced, you guys might have seen some of this more, is quite a lot of the manufacturers are offering a very interesting surround speaker option to go with the sound bars as well. And I think that for almost all living rooms that I can imagine, that's probably a pretty good choice. A soundbar with up firings, and then those rear speakers, either with the up firings, or, you know, you see them almost a bipole, dare I say it, that are given a really good spread of sound. Yeah, they've understood the problem and they've engineered it very well. It's a normal living room. Can't say much more than that, can you?
Yeah. And there's lots of solutions out there, Jules. So you mentioned the Samsung. I think you mentioned it'd be the Q990. I think you're talking about.
That's right. Yes, been reviewed, hasn't it, just recently?
Yeah, I think we've reviewed every iteration of that up to now, and very, very impressive what that unit can do. Sometimes manufacturers, when they send TVs out to me for review, they'll bundle in the soundbar. I haven't asked for it, but they'll bundle it in the hope that I'm going to review it along with the TV, and they're disappointed when I don't. But I get to play with it and I get to see what the interaction's like. And a lot of these TVs now talk to the soundbar. Some of them do it wirelessly, and you're still getting lossless audio through wireless connection. You know, you've got WOW from LG and Samsung do something similar, and so on. So, and that's fantastic TV, because the consumer doesn't have to plug anything in. They can set it's not even plug and play. It's just plug it in, and it'll all talk to each other, and it'll all do it, and it'll do it losslessly. And where we are now from where we were 20 years ago, that is utterly amazing. And I heard LG's latest one recently at a demo, and I couldn't believe. I was actually looking around the room to see if there was other speakers in the room, because this was a one box solution, and I could have sworn there was surround speakers behind me, and there wasn't. I don't know why my screen's just done.
I don't know. You've got fireworks going off, Phil.
Thumbs up. That's AI in action,
isn't it? But yeah, I mean, it's something like that, and you think, well, actually, for the average living room, if you think that people are buying a TV and TV sound is really disappointing. I mean, even a 115-inch TV, it sounds weak in comparison to what you can do with even just an average soundbar. So yeah, I think people shouldn't get too hung up, especially those that maybe consider themselves home cinema fans or audiophiles, shouldn't get too hung up on the idea of downsizing to these boxes. There's lots of solutions out there, so lots of fantastic solutions. I mean, recently, and the review is going to go up soon, I had the Canvas system here, which was basically an oversized soundbar, but it used back 3D audio processing, DSP processing, and some really rudimentary room correction. I mean, it wasn't anything spectacular like Dirac or anything like that. You basically put your mobile phone on and you went in the corners and listened to what was happening in the corners, and then the sound that you got from that was fantastic. If you were asked after a hi-fi system with two floor standers, it wasn't quite the same level of that, but it got really, really close to that level.
Yeah.
Fantastic audio. And if that's all you want and you want the aesthetics to go with it, it's a fantastic solution. So I guess where people really get anxious, guys, is when you're talking about surround speakers, because people realize that you actually have to have a physical speaker behind you to get the full immersive effect. And 5.1, I would say, is
Yeah.
more than
Well,
enough. You
the
know,
reality,
thanks to
Phil,
that.
is that many of the people I go and calibrate for, their sofas against the back wall.
Yeah.
And exactly what Neil said earlier is you often see the two. So I've got a 7.1 system, they say, and then they've got the two speakers right there, and they've
Yeah.
got the side surrounds just there, inches away from them, and it's just you feel that they probably had a fit. They need to have more speakers to make it better. But actually, if you go for a 5, it's a better situation for them than that. Exactly what you're saying.
Neil, if we're talking about the past, Tomlinson Holman, guy was an absolute genius. He's the guy, if nobody knows, the guy behind THX. So it wasn't George Lucas, it was behind THX. George Lucas set him a problem. He says, my films sound rubbish in the theater. Go solve it. Go solve that problem. And he came up with fantastic solutions that we saw a long time ago, back in the days of ProLogic and right at the very start. But a lot of those solutions still are valid now. Especially when you're talking about small spaces, Neil. So you mentioned dipole, bipole. These are still solutions that will work for people.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Bipole has become a dirty word these days. All a bipole means is that you've got two drivers driving equally so that you have a very wide sound dispersion. Dipole is when they're opposed to each other. That's still a dirty word.
Yeah.
Bipole, however, can be a wonderful solution. Not just for a living room theatre, but honestly for a lot of theatres, it's still a wonderful solution. We're speaking about 5.1 quite a bit here as well. One of the mistakes you still see people make with 5.1 is they try to mount those speakers still behind them. Really, a 5.1 should be slightly behind you, only slightly behind. So that's actually one that I still see quite a lot. If you could get them up on the side walls, my own old living room theatre, that was what we had, and it was fantastic effect that we were able to achieve because you had good space between the listener and the speakers. That helps consistency across the sound field because they're not like right on top of you. It was really an interesting one. And then there's actually a lot of stuff, if you go back to your matrix processing and all that type of stuff about decorrelations of sound and all these types of things. I'm sure all those tricks, all of them are happening in a lot of the sound bars that we're speaking about. They just don't call it the same thing anymore.
Yeah. So, don't feel like you're compromising if you're getting rid of speakers, because sometimes less is more. And, think about the room, think about your positioning. And not everybody lives in a perfect room where you can put the speakers where they should be. A lot of these soundbars as well, and this is one of the problems that I've fed back to manufacturers a few times when we've had items in for review and so on, is sometimes you don't have control of the surrounds. And what I mean by that is that you don't have independent control. They're under one volume for both speakers. And if you have to put them at different places, that can affect. And I think manufacturers are starting to realize that and change that a little bit. And we're seeing, the DSP becoming more powerful. You're seeing a bit more room correction being added in, even if it's just using your mobile phone microphone to do, very basic room correction. It's starting to happen now. And what you can get is fantastic. So let's move it up slightly. We've got a little bit more room now to talk about. We can get the
a double garage conversion, Phil.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe something like that. So you've got a dedicated room, you've got space, or you've got a larger living room where you can get a system in. Are we still relying on the same products, or can we look at other products? Are we going to be bouncing sound off the ceiling, or are we going to be putting in ceiling speakers? Or are we going to put speakers on the ceiling? I mean, we know what the best approach is, but the best approach is a Dolby Atmos theater, and I've been in a few Dolby Atmos theaters, and they're ugly as sin because you can see every single speaker that's dotted right the way across the ceiling and all the way around the walls. We don't live like that. So, what solution are we going to have, Jules?
Well, if you do have that double garage conversion, which is what I have with my cinema room, then you have the luxury of being able to hide the speakers behind some acoustic material. So, you know, my room is fabric wrapped. It's all black to enhance the contrast on the screen. You can't see any of the speakers, which actually has another purpose, which is also that you can you kind of decouple you're not seeing where the sound source is coming from, and it just helps that immersion when you can't see them. So that's a good option if you have that capability in that kind of room.
And that's a great point you raised, because Neil, one of the first things that I noticed about one of the rooms that you built, and I came and had a visit a long time. I forget where it was now, but it was fabric walls. It was a acoustically transparent screen. You saw none of the speakers, yet the performance, just like Jules says there, when you can't see the sound source, it does something with a mind where you kind of decouple yourself, like Jules described, and you let the sound, pass over you.
Yeah.
It's more interactive, more immersive.
Well, I mean, so quite a bit of stuff in that one. So one of the things that people probably don't understand is quite how much background processing their brain is doing to couple what they've seen with their eyes with what they're experiencing, and that's your whole evolutionary responses and all of that type of stuff. And that's where a lot of the discussion about the importance of sound above versus sound to the sides and rear and all of that type of stuff comes from. If you hide the speakers, you sort of remove one of those processing points, and it just comes towards you. It becomes, I know it sounds weird to say, if people have not experienced that, it does actually sound quite a lot more natural because you're not thinking very hard about where the sound you think is coming from. It just appears to you.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that is important as you move up in size, okay, is typically your soundbar, just because it's small, is going to run out of power. Okay, that's really, really, for me, the biggest point where you want to change between those systems. If you're over about 3 meters, let's say, away from that, that's going to start to get to that point where the power amplifiers and drivers in a soundbar are just really not capable of delivering an experience. Now, I am as guilty as the next man. We do all of our calculations at 105 dB peaks and all that type of stuff, right? If you've not experienced that, that is officially freaking loud, okay? I don't actually think that many cinemas are run at that intense level every single time. But at the same time, to be able to run it, that you do get that dynamic punch, that's when you move, for me, from a soundbar experience that has a beautiful, homogeneous sound, it's very enjoyable, pleasant, all these types of words, to dynamic and exciting and thrilling. And I think that really the distance is probably a good a point as any to separate why you would go for one of those systems over the other. You've got the space to put slightly bigger speakers into, drive them a bit harder, and so on. If you look at a sound bar, I'm sure the specs are always massively high, but a 20 watt amp, 30 watt amp maybe per channel versus 150 watts in a good AV receiver, 400 watts in a good power amplifier. Those watts are important at making that speaker go and come back as quickly as possible and delivering that experience, basically.
And of course, you've got your headroom as well there, haven't you? That you can't go wrong with having the headroom for the transients, and so that's where you get your impact and your weight. And yeah,
it's funny. I was at High End Munich a few weeks ago, and that was one of the things that you notice as you're going around. And I notice that I'm lucky enough I get to see quite a lot of big cinemas and stuff like that. At a certain level, almost everything has a good sound. Okay. It's when you start to turn it up that you start to hear the things get distressed. And I personally seem to be very sensitive to power compression. If you're familiar with, it starts to make a very brittle sound and harsh. And I'll not name the name of the speaker, but I was shocked, actually. I was really terribly shocked by one of the big names that's out there at this minute in time, how much power compression was going on in that thing. It was terrible, in my opinion. Don't know if I was the only one in the room that could hear it, but lots of different things that went into that. And it's actually a reason why, if people look at a commercial cinema, why they've got these gigantic horn-loaded loudspeakers and all that type of stuff. It's just, you need to get the welly and get the power out there into the listening position. So different things go into that headroom discussion. But Phil, there's no replacement for a V8.
No replacement for displacement. Absolutely.
It's the same in audio.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is the thing, why drive 7.2.4 at the maximum of the amplifier is, and it doesn't work in your room because you haven't got the space, compared to 5.1 where you've got that headroom, the speakers are positioned right, you've got the dynamic range from that audio performance. It's and these are common mistakes. And again, I've made these mistakes in the past, so that, we all have. And that's how you learn. You don't learn unless you make mistakes. Or you go down the wrong road and you think, actually, I can do this better going another way. So yeah, we're a bit larger room. We can hide things behind fabric. And again, it's a really fantastic trick that people can use. Now, you can go the way that Jules has gone and live in a black hole, which can be really quite oppressive, Jules.
I don't live there.
I know.
It's not everyone's choice. It's not everyone's choice. It
can be quite oppressive. But again, there's fantastic solutions out there in terms of hiding speakers. So if you have to hide the surround speakers and you don't have fabric walls or whatever, there are fantastic solutions out there where you can do that, Neil. And even in ceiling, when you're talking about Atmos, there's some fantastic solutions now. We've moved on from where we were, even just 10 years ago now. So if people don't want to bounce the sound off the ceiling, or they live in a room that's maybe not ideal for that, in ceiling speakers, what kind of things should be people looking for? Where do you actually position them? And what kind of solutions have you got in terms of hiding them?
Well, so I think that one of the things that you've really got to think of for in ceilings, especially for Atmos, right, which is quite different from distributed audio and things like that. I really think you've got to look at a system where you can at least aim the tweeter, and ideally you would have an aimable front baffle. Quite a lot of manufacturers now make a speaker that has an actual angled baffle. So when you install that, you can kind of optimize that so that the sound is being directed towards the listening position instead of just straight down. The problem with doing it straight down is that you become so far off axis, and anyone who's ever looked at a speaker review will know that that's kind of the worst possible place to be normally. So being able to angle that is a much, much more effective way of delivering the sound. We were kind of joking about something before the recording started, but even for very big TVs, that's actually quite an interesting solution, is to use the height of the ceiling to get a large-ish speaker, as long as you have an unobstructed opening for the sound to come through towards the listening position. It's quite an interesting approach that quite a few people are looking at, not without its challenges, obviously. That would be one of the first things that I would do. The second thing, most people are still probably talking about having a plastered, painted ceiling at this point. Your tolerance of that appearance, as we have proven mere minutes ago, is obviously quite different between individuals. Again, a lot of companies are offering very, very interesting grille options now. Instead of having to have a lip, the grille will recess, you can still retain a flush finish on the roof. They're all little things, but they all serve to just make the product look a lot nicer in the whole overall solution. One thing to be careful of, everyone likes a square grille on an in-ceiling speaker. Got to make sure you've got a laser level if you're going to do that one. So get those things lined up perfectly. We've seen those off to the side and all the rest of it. So there's quite a few options there. Now, it also used to be the case that the in-ceiling speaker was an afterthought. Jules, you'll have seen this as well. It was an afterthought. No manufacturer had really made a dedicated product for that. But actually now you see a lot of companies who have that that height channel as a dedicated part of their range. And the front width channel also, very difficult channel to get right for kind of the same reasons. Now you can get like full active bi-amped in ceiling speakers if that's what you want to have. So suddenly there's a lot more options to deliver a lot of performance. I still think you've got to remember that maybe 20% of the performance is coming from those channels when you're thinking about how you do the rest of the system. But yeah, once you've maxed out all that, then there is an opportunity to go up there.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point there. 20% of the system, if they're used, because we've already discussed this, it's down to the creator whether they put anything up there. And the other thing, and this is probably an interesting point, and going off slightly on a tangent, but I think it's worth discussing. So Wilfred Van Baen, he came up with Auro 3D. I've met Wilfred a few times. I've been to Galaxy Studios. I've seen various demonstrations with Auro, fantastic technology. And something he said, it stuck with me, Neil, and that is that your ears don't point up the way. Your ears have about that much of an angle. And evolutionary, the reason why is because there could be something up in a tree next to you. There was never airplanes or anything above your head, so you didn't have to hear anything from up here. So it's interesting that he was talking about height channels and having the channels at a certain height, whereas Atmos are talking about having ceiling channels, which seems to be a different way of approaching that issue. So you put these systems in some very, very high-end, residential and commercial things. So what kind of approach are you taking professionally when it comes to that? Because you're looking for the best possible performance. And who is it that's doing it right, or is there no right and wrong when it comes to the placement of the height channel?
Well, put me on the spot a bit there, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why you're here.
So I had, thinking of Bracknell, Phil, when I had my place down there, we had one of the very first, if not the first, Auro 13.1 system outside of Galaxy Studios and Barco. I had the beta PC for processing and all that type of stuff. So I was immersed in that format. And I actually think a lot of what that does still makes a lot of sense. Okay. The angular separations and all that type of stuff, it does. I don't know if you guys can remember, there was a tractor demo, and the tractor just used to drive.
Yeah.
Honestly, I must have heard that thing 1,000 times, and it every time impressed me. And it's still, you know how you have these clips, it's still one that always sticks in my head, and the bells ringing in the distance and all that type of stuff. Now, of course, there's commercial considerations that come into this as well. One guy says that's the right place. Well, the other guy kind of has to say that's perhaps the right place. Now, I also think you have to look, whereas Dolby's like big market for selling that solution in the first instance is commercial, okay? If you go to a commercial theatre, you have channels that are quite high up on the wall. That's how they're designed, okay? Now, Auro was intended to be a fairly straightforward add-on in a commercial theatre context, and it still is a relatively simple add-on to go from a normal 7.1, even with all those channels, by the way, they're normally a 5.1 or at best a 7.1, those cinemas. And they're all arrayed, all of those channels. But in a lot of instances, you don't actually have the height to fit an extra speaker above there. But the roof was always available. The roof was always available. That was actually a very convenient point to put speakers. And then, of course, you talk about stereo imaging, basically, of the sound. If I have a speaker here and a speaker, here, can I image in between those two? Well, of course, I can also do that. So which one gives more flexibility and the better sound quality? Hey, that's a whole interesting debate to have. Now, we've not spoken about DTSX here.
I was going to mention that.
It's very interesting.
Saving that one.
We always think they're dead, and then somehow they spring back to life from somewhere. Very, very interesting what they've been doing with that, because they've kind of looked at Auro, in my opinion, and they've looked at Atmos, and they've said, I like your idea, Mr. Auro, with your bubble of sound, and I like your idea with your 8 million channels, Mr. Atmos. why don't we just smash both of these two things together and call it DTSX? And I think that is a very interesting approach also. Now, I also have had a very lucky run of it. I mentioned the very large Atmos system, which we got to work on recently. Very grateful for the amazing client and integrator who did that project. We also were very lucky enough to do a Barco Auro Max system recently, which is a 34-channel Auro Max system. So I actually got to compare both of those systems, like almost one after the other. Was there one that was better than the other? I have to tell you, no. They were both amazing. And I think that perhaps was the best bit of news out of the whole thing. It was different approaches that both delivered an incredible result. And in fact, there was really nothing that I would have said out of either of them that was strongly plus or minus. They were just both absolutely amazing. The Auro Max as an integrator was a bit of an easier experience. It didn't require a year and a half of work of submissions to Dolby to get signed off or anything like that. But at the same time, there was a sense of coolness from everybody that such a system exists in a residential application. So, yeah, difficult in a commercial sense to pick a difference between them. In a residential sense, though, I think the discussion is different. Where's the content? Where's the content?
Yeah,
it's
that
game a long time ago.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Auro, it was always going to be, you got a huge company like Dolby. And I really did feel for Wilfred because I thought he had a fantastic solution. I mean, their upmixer, you put mono track into their upmixer and what they can do, again, using DSP power and algorithms and all the rest of it, absolutely amazing what they could do with that technology. But yeah, when you've got a behemoth like Dolby, who have the resources that they have, who have the engineers that they have, who have the R&D facilities that they have.
You actually touched on something interesting that we've not touched on yet, Phil, right? If you've invested in all of these channels, right, I can assure you, the people with the 33-channel and the 55-channel systems are just the same. You know what? You want those speakers to be playing as much as possible. Okay, it's very much a shame when you have two stereo speakers playing, when you have all of this type of stuff. And in fact, that upmixing capability is a very, very interesting point that remains, in my opinion, extremely important in these systems. So you've touched on it there. DSU does a great job, but it tends to be a little bit harsh, in my opinion. It does something a bit weird with the vocal as well, the way that it spreads it out. And your Auro upmixer, even on an Atmos layout, for me, can often sound more naturalistic, especially with music. I feel it sounds much better. I was lucky enough to spend an hour with some Apple spatial music even, and trying these different upmixing algorithms because we had so many channels, of course, that they all needed to be processed somehow. It was very, very interesting to note just how different they were. Now, perhaps that is the most interesting bit of this whole thing. If you have the content in the native format, yeah, they're all good. They're all really, really good. There's nothing else to be said about it. It's actually these upmixing options that can help to elevate these systems, yeah, even further beyond perhaps what people have been looking at. And if you hear upmixing done well, in many ways it can be better than the native mix. It just has a certain sense of space and things like that, because the original mix was already done very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going back over the years, we've had lots of attempts at surround music, and that kind of thing, 5.1 mixes, DTS surround mixes. We've had all these kind of format stuff, but Atmos seems to be the one that's caught everybody's attention and has become a de facto in the industry. And like I said to you, I was recently on a brand new Atmos mix stage at Sony. what surprised me about that space was it didn't look the way I thought it was going to look. Um, and this comes all the way full circle back to aesthetics and the space that you're in and the kind of system that you're going to have. This mixed theatre looked like a Japanese garden. It was a brand new mix stage, and I asked the lady there who'd been working for 30 odd years doing the final mix on many of the films that you'll hold dear. And I said to her, you don't mind me asking a really silly question here, but this room, this space looks nothing like I expected it to look. You have glass on the side walls here. I mean, it's fake glass. It's not actually looking out into anything because it had a fake background behind it, so it looked like a Japanese garden. This was on both sides of the room, and it was lit in a certain way and so on. And this is our final mix stage. So we're not talking about a theatre or a home cinema or anything. This was a professional sound mix stage. And I asked her why, and she says, the clients. We have very important clients that come in here who are spending 100,000 a day to hire this space and to mix their films. And they want to be able to do the most professional job with the best possible sound and everything, but they also want a nice space. They want to be sitting somewhere. They don't want to be sitting in, sorry, Jules, they don't want to be sitting in a dark black hole. They want to have something.
You're
something
obsessed
nice.
with my black hole.
Yes, sorry. And there's the intro.
We won't go there.
Yeah.
Please don't go there.
But it just came to me. Again, they've designed that space. They've thought about it. They've thought about the client. They've thought about who's actually coming in and using this space, but also about the performance at the end of it. And that, this is a final mix stage. This is where the final decisions are made on somebody's pride and joy. Their multi-million, tens of million, hundreds of million production. And yet it was designed and it had aesthetics that I would never have considered would have been in a professional space like that, Neil. So it shows you how far we've come and what you can get away with and still have, that performance, but in a room or in a space or in a design that you never actually think would work.
Sure, but that's the beauty of sound, I think. Picture kind of drives that whole black room. I'm sure Jose's image is absolutely
I'm just
die for,
yeah,
because it's in that beautiful black space there. But that's one of the things you can enjoy sound with the lights on and music and all the rest of the stuff that we've touched on throughout this discussion here. There's no black rooms in my house to sit and listen to music, and this wouldn't be what I would personally look for. But I think that you've seen that more and more. The aesthetic is it's actually interesting. I had this discussion with someone a couple of days ago. A lot of the aesthetic of cinema designs now is being driven by the speaker positioning, because you've got to hide all of these things. There's a certain sense that the cinemas are starting to look a little bit the same, which I think is a shame. I don't agree necessarily with that, but that's one of your challenges with all of these speakers, is to come up with a cool design for them to go in.
Yeah. Right. So we've talked about surround speakers. We've talked about Atmos speakers in the ceiling. We've talked about, all these channels that we now have to play with, the aesthetics of the room, how we set the room up and so on. Do we need all these speakers, Neil?
Do we need them? No. Do we like them? Yes. Simple as that. Simple as that.
I mean, at the end of the day, the choice is yours. And if you're listening to this for advice and all that, at the end of the day, you need to make the decision and how your system's going to look, how your system's going to sound. Hopefully, we've given you some pointers, some advice, some of our experiences that we've had either professionally through what Neil does, designing rooms and so on, or from reviewing or from calibration or whatever. But at the end of the day, it depends on your space and the space that you want to fill and the audio quality that you want to have. And there's so many solutions out there. And I'm very, very thankful that we are in the positions that we are in 2024, because when I started getting into this hobby, I had a Nikon stereo video player and a hi-fi system and a couple of speakers. And to me, that was amazing. That was the cinema. And then we had Pro Logic, and then we had Laserdisc, and where we are now, the amount of choice that you have out there is fantastic, and the amount of advice you have as well. So AV Forums is full of enthusiasts who have lots of experiences themselves, who've designed their own rooms, designed their own home cinemas. They're all living spaces. They've created media walls, all that kind of thing. There's a wealth of knowledge there. You've got the likes of Neil, who's coming on the podcast, who works at the other end, designing these bespoke, beautiful home cinemas for wealthy clients. But it all trickles down. It all comes down to everybody at the end of the day. It might take a few years, but we'll get there eventually, and you get the technology. And Jules, where we are now, I mean, you have your own demo facilities and stuff as well. You've got a real passion for this. It's so good, it's confusing because we've got so much choice now.
Yeah, and I was going to make a point actually that Dolby have very accessible material if you're planning your room. And you want to decide what kind of system, what kind of layout you're going to put in there. They've got guides for positioning for 5.1 and upwards of that. So it's a really good place for people to access that information, because when I'm called in to calibrate, people think about equalization as that's what calibration is. But if you get your speakers in the right place to start off with, that's like so much of the job done. I mean, so if forum members, if you have not been to the Dolby website, you can pull down those materials you can see, and that will whatever the space you have available. It's not going to be the same for everybody. You're going to have to look at whatever is going to fit your room and fit you, like is acceptable to the rest of your family. But there's some good information there as you plan your room and how many speakers you're going to put in there.
Yeah, and as Neil said earlier on as well, RP22 is a document you can get from Cedia. It's full of great ideas, suggestions, and how people are implementing systems. And of course, Neil, you've got a few of your own tools that are available. Some of them are free of charge and so on. So,
Cinema Tools. So if you go to cinema-tools.com, you can actually use the speaker layout calculator, which will take the Dolby documents that Jules just mentioned. For a rectangular room, it will let you actually calculate where they should all be positioned. It will give you a little PDF report for that. It takes a couple of seconds to do, so a very easy way to start.
Excellent. Well, I think we've answered most of the points that we wanted to answer today. You can go from having 2 channels to however many channels as you like. Like we say, you don't have to follow our advice, but hopefully we've given you some pointers and some food for thought. And yeah, so just to wrap up on the podcast, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So before we finish, current competitions. So I'm going to pick on Jules for the current competition. What do we have open at the minute?
Well, Phil, you can win a streaming system worth £2,400, which includes a Roxanne Atessa integrated streaming amplifier and the Monitor Audio Silver 107G bookshelf speakers. Closing date is 11:59 p.m. Wednesday, 28th of August.
Excellent. So you can head over to avforums.com/competitions to enter. As long as you're not me and you're over 18, you can enter that. Or you need to be a resident of the UK as well. But if you tick all them boxes, you can enter. Disc competitions, you can also win retro DVDs, Blu-rays, or 4K discs. They are available to our patrons and standard AV Forums members. Same address for that. Some previous winners. Jules, do you want to read out who the previous winners are?
Yes, congratulations to J. Rule, who won a set of I've been drinking.
It's easy
won a set of KEF LSX2 LT wireless hi-fi speakers worth $899. RGB123 won a pair of the brand new Q Acoustics M40 speakers worth $749, courtesy of Peter Tyson.
Excellent prizes there. Well done, guys, for winning those. We've got some new patrons as well, Jules.
Yep, we have Leon Rod, Denard Leonard, Sai32, Tariq Lorenko, Crazy Goose, and Oscar Madfish.
And we also have introduced a new annual membership. If you want to do that and support us for the whole year, we do have some supporters there. Thank you very much. And those are
Gary Heather, Sebastian Kafanti, Andrew Karanaluf, Dave Chamberlain, David McRoberts, David Oliver, Dr. Neil, and Per Vase Fredrickson.
Excellent. And also bought us a coffee was George Van and somebody called someone. I'm sure people buy us a coffee and then put the most unpronounceable name in there. I'm sure it's a little joke that people are doing now. But yeah, well done on your pronunciations there, Jules. Some of them weren't easy. Q&A feedback time. Right, so from our last Home AV podcast, which was the 20th of May, multiple subwoofers in your room, how to set them up and use Room AQ. So from the homepage thread, Bill said, what an amazing podcast. The transducer piece was extremely interesting. I think it was you that raised that one, Neil. From what I've read and heard, timing is the hardest part to get right. If Dirac could solve this or make it easier to implement, I'm sure lots of folks would be very interested. More of this, please. Anything to add to that, Neil?
Well, yeah, timing is the hard part. It's one of the biggest challenges. Jules will know this when you're doing your calibration. So it's not only the timing, it's the phase. A million and one different videos on that, but the Room EQ Wizard has some very nice tools for doing that these days that I like to use. So,
and of course, Dirac is listening for tones, and transducers don't make a noise. So, it's not so easy.
Yeah. Gilbers said, for any of the Dirac experts, when correction is restricted just to bass frequencies, either by adjusting the curtains or when using a limited version of Dirac that comes with some products, will that leave higher frequencies completely unmolested, or do phase impulse corrections unavoidably affect the full frequency range to some extent? There was a response from Marky Mills, who said, I wouldn't proclaim myself to be an expert, reasonably knowledgeable. As you suggest, I believe Dirac still has an effect on the impulse response outside of the curtains. It won't try and hit a target on the frequency response, but also won't leave the sound completely untouched. Anything to add there, Jules or Neil?
I need to look into that. I'm not quite sure, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
I personally wouldn't top it off, because there is actually quite a lot of stuff that goes on in the HF, especially if you've got fabric wrapped walls and all of that type of stuff. I would certainly give it a try before I topped it off to see if there was any anomalies that could get taken out of it.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you've pulled your curtains across what it does beyond that curtain, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's something that we can look into, and if we come up with something, or we get our friend from Dirac back on the podcast, we will certainly ask that question. Chester said, brilliant podcast. I'm hoping to go dual sub for the benefits discussed next year, and hopefully more of the Dirac features like bass control or ART will be coming to more products soon. I believe NAD already have something in the pipeline. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to see that technology come into more and more products as time goes by. From YouTube podcast channel thread, Alicia Beth D 1970 said, cost of Dirac is the issue. His or her Denon X38H cost $1,699. Dirac Live or multi-sub support is $799. That's almost half the cost of the AVR. I suppose when you start getting into those sort of products and that kind of pricing, that's where you can run into some issues there, Jules.
Yeah, I mean there are other alternatives. Room EQ Wizard with a mini DSP can help in many ways. If you want, that Dirac solution, yes, everything is an extra purchase. I mean, it'd be nice to see those prices come down. I suppose it depends how you see it as a purchase. Do you see it as an you don't have to do it straight away, but you could use it as a treat yourself for Christmas or something like that as an upgrade.
Yeah. I mean, how many times are you actually going to use the system? Are you going to set it once and forget? Maybe hire a calibrator if that's the case, and somebody come in and do that.
Yeah, it's a question that's being asked to me. It's like, do I buy mini DSP and RU, or do I buy the Dirac bass control? And the answer is not going to be the same for everybody. So there's an additional piece of kit required. Obviously, the mini DSP is going to sit in your system. And obviously it requires a certain microphone and a certain amount of familiarity with Dirac. On the other hand, obviously bass control also requires a certain amount of experience. So yeah, choose your poison.
Yep. Okay. Well, hopefully that maybe answers your question there. And yeah, I think more people would take the jump if there was maybe even more tiers, enthusiast tiers or whatever, or maybe it's something that Dirac can look at and maybe come up with a solution to that one. But thanks for raising that question. Anyway, so that's it for the podcast this week, the Home AV podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Our next episode is the movies and TV show edition with Kaz and the team on Monday, the 24th of June, and that'll be followed on the 27th of June with the 4K and Blu-ray disc physical media show, proving to be very, very popular with you guys out there. I'm glad to see you're all enjoying those podcasts. Thank you very much for the support there. All I need to do is thank Jules and Neil for their time. Thank you guys. It is appreciated.
Cheers, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
And don't forget, our podcasts are available every Monday, a different version every Monday at 7 p.m. And where the month has an extra Monday, we thought of that as well. You've got a gaming podcast on those months as well. And they're always live at 7 p.m. on the YouTube channel. And the audio-only version should be round about the same time. I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you very much for watching and listening. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/AV Forums if you've enjoyed today's podcast. Don't forget to share it around as well. If you think it should get a wider audience, if we've talked about stuff you think more people should know about or listen to, then please do go and share it on social channels, forums, and so on. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks. Cheers.